From now on, Mom, your retirement checks go to my account. You only need a place to die. He said it while scrolling through his phone, as if those words were ordinary, as if he were talking about the weather. The air left the room before I could take another breath. The spoon I was holding slipped from my fingers and hit the tile, the sound sharper than glass. Juliet didn't look up from her mug. She stirred her coffee, calm and deliberate, as if my life hadn't just been rewritten in one sentence. I kept my eyes on the stew simmering on the stove. The smell of thyme filled the air, but I couldn't taste anything anymore. Bennett sat at the table, setting his phone down with a sigh, the way he used to when he was a boy and didn't want to do his homework. It's for your own good, he added, his tone soft but final. We'll take care of everything from now on. Take care. That used to mean something else. When his father was alive, those words were a promise, not a command. I nodded, once my hands steadying themselves against the counter. The house felt smaller, suddenly, like all the air had been folded in half. Outside, the wind brushed against the kitchen window. Steady, indifferent. Juliet glanced up, her smile polite, distant. Don't worry, Odessa. It's just easier this way. Easier. For whom I reached for the ladle and served the stew into 3 bowls, my movements slow and precise. Bennett ate quickly, checking his phone between bites. Juliet complimented the seasoning, already talking about the bank visit tomorrow. When they finished, I cleared the table. The dishes clinked quietly in the sink. Their bedroom door closed upstairs, and the house fell into silence. I stood in the kitchen, looking at the empty plates, at the life I had built, and somehow lost inside the same 4 walls. Then I turned off the light, sat down at the table, and waited for the next sound to come from them. The house felt unfamiliar in small, deliberate ways. The old rocking chair where Howard used to read the paper. Gone. Hauled to the curb without a word. The wall where our wedding photo used to hang now held a mirror that didn't quite fit the frame. Juliet had taken over the grocery list. You don't need to worry about that anymore, she said sweetly, as if worry had an expiration date. I watched them stock the pantry with things I didn't recognize. Frozen dinners, almond milk, no cloves, no cinnamon, nothing warm. Bennett walked through the hallway like he owned it. His voice louder now, his instructions sharper. He was only 36, but he moved through my home like a landlord showing a rental. Let Juliet handle the bills. It's just easier this way, he kept saying. One morning, Juliet slid a stack of papers toward me. The bank needs this. Just a simplification, she said, tapping where my signature should go. I almost signed. Habit, maybe. Trust, perhaps. But something made me look closer. I looked up at Juliet, who smiled without blinking. We're just trying to help, she said. I didn't say a word. I set the pen down and folded the paper in half. Slow and neat. I'll look it over later. She didn't push. That told me more than her smile ever could. That evening, I stood in the pantry and stared at a half-used jar of cloves. The label was faded, the lid loose. I remembered when I used to bake for joy. Now I could hardly taste anything at all. That night, I opened the drawer in the hallway, where I used to keep the spare keys, and found nothing. The papers were buried between unpaid bills, folded neatly as if they belonged there. I sat at the table reading each line until my hands stopped shaking. The signatures were clear now. Mine and Bennett's, except mine wasn't real. The handwriting looked close, but not close enough. A stranger could have missed it. A mother couldn't. For a long time, I just sat there, the ticking of the kitchen clock loud enough to fill the silence. I could have confronted them, demanded an explanation, shouted their names down the hallway. But shouting would only prove what they already believed, that I was old and emotional not to be taken seriously. So I stayed quiet and thought. That evening, while they were out, I took a freezer bag from the drawer, slipped the forged documents inside, and filled it with water from the tap. I sealed it, pressed out the air, and laid it flat in the freezer. Watching the water settle around the papers, I felt a strange calm. Some truths needed to be kept cold before they were ready to be seen. When the freezer door shut, I began to cook. The stew simmered low and slow the way Howard used to like it. I peeled peaches, sliced them thin, and made cobbler for dessert. By the time Bennett came home, the house smelled the way it used to, warm, forgiving. He poured himself a glass of wine and smiled. "Did you finish the bank paperwork?" he asked. I wiped my hands on a towel and turned to face him. "Yes," I said softly. He kissed Juliet on the cheek and went to the living room. I watched the ice form around the pages through the thin light of the freezer, solid and perfect. That night, the house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, only waiting. I was already at the table when he came down the stairs, still barefoot, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The morning was soft quiet. I had brewed the coffee strong, just the way Howard used to drink it, and left the kitchen window cracked open for the breeze. Bennett mumbled something about whipped cream as he opened the fridge. Then came the sound. Not a crash, not a curse. A scream. High, sharp, terrified. The kind of scream that comes before the mind has time to reason. I didn't move. I watched his shadow through the glass of my mug. He stumbled back, pointing, his voice breaking. "What the hell is this?" Juliet came running. "What happened?" He pointed again. "In the freezer. What is this?" She opened the door slowly. When she saw the block of ice, she took a step back. Inside, the forged signatures floated perfectly visible. The ink had bled slightly into the cold, softening the edges, but not enough to hide the truth. Juliet looked from the freezer to me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. I stood up, slow and deliberate, wiping my hands on my apron. "I thought you liked cobbler," I said. Then I walked to the counter and picked up the apples. One by one, I peeled them, thin ribbons curling onto the cutting board. No one said anything. Bennett closed the freezer too fast, the suction making the whole appliance groan. His hands were shaking. Juliet crossed her arms. Her jaw clenched. But I didn't look up. I sliced another apple, then another. My hands moved like they used to, steady and calm. The house stayed quiet, as if even the walls were listening. When I reached the final apple, I paused just for a moment and turned the knife toward the core. The new locks clicked louder than the old ones. I heard them that morning, metal scraping into place, bolts, turning the front door suddenly unfamiliar. Juliet handed me a small brass key while I was folding laundry. "Just for your bedroom," she said, too cheerful. "For safety, of course." I took it without a word, slid it into my apron pocket. That evening, I placed the key on the dresser and didn't touch it again. Around midnight, when the house was finally still and the floorboards stopped creaking, I slipped into my slippers and sat by the window with the phone. I still remembered his number, Daniel Mercer. We worked together decades ago when I ran the school fundraisers, and he was branch manager at the bank across town. He picked up after 2 rings. Odessa. His voice was older, but still kind. "I need to move my account," I said. Quietly. "I don't want any shared access." He didn't ask why. Maybe he didn't have to. By the time the sun came up, my retirement funds had a new home, protected, untouchable mine. At breakfast, Bennett mentioned something about needing to stop by the bank later to adjust a few things. I nodded politely and poured myself another cup of coffee. Juliet glanced at me, narrowing her eyes. "You okay, Odessa?" "I'm fine," I said. She looked at the untouched key on the dresser that morning, and again that night when she passed my room. I saw her pause just a second too long, her mouth twitching, like she wanted to ask something, but didn't dare. I left the door slightly open after that. Not for trust, not for welcome. Just enough to remind them this was still my house. And I was still here. Dinner came on a tray now, not because I asked, Because they said I should rest more. Bennett set the plate down on the nightstand. You've been getting forgetful, Mom, Juliet added. We're just trying to keep things simple. Then came the whispers in the hallway. Words like placement and long-term care. They spoke in careful tones, the way people talk around someone they believe is already fading. I nodded, smiled, ate slowly, let the food go cold sometimes. Let them think I was shrinking. The truth was hidden in the closet, beneath the sweaters I hadn't worn in years. Inside a canvas bag with a broken zipper were the savings I had kept since before Bennett was born. Wrapped in wool socks tucked inside a casserole dish no one ever used, old bills, still crisp, still mine. That night, I unwrapped the money and spread it across the bed. Not much by today's standards, but enough to start. I used the burner phone Daniel had given me, texted him the account numbers, the steps, the amounts. We worked slowly, night by night. Each message from him was short, clean, precise. Confirmed. Transfer complete. Account protected. No joint access. I never left the room. Didn't need to. Every time Juliet passed by, she saw me knitting or staring at the ceiling or napping in my chair. But while they managed the groceries, the bills, the furniture, I was rerouting the future. I heard her on the phone one afternoon. Once the house is sold, we'll be free. She won't even know it's gone. That was the moment I knew I had to act faster. Because while they were serving me dinner like a patient, they were planning their exit and leaving me behind. Juliet came into my room with a folder pressed to her chest. Bennett followed, standing close behind her like a shadow. Just some final documents, she said, setting them on the small table by my bed. Routine things. The bank, the insurance, you know. I adjusted my glasses and opened the folder. The pages were thick and neatly stacked. Every signature line had my name typed beneath it. Bennett cleared his throat. It'll make things easier for all of us, Mom. I nodded, turning the pages one by one. My pen hovered for a moment over the first line. Then I signed. Once, twice, 3 times. Juliet exhaled, smiling as if she'd just settled something important. Thank you, Odessa. I knew you'd understand. I smiled back. They didn't notice the difference, the pen I used. The slight variation in my signature, the fact that every page they'd given me was legally worthless. 2 days earlier, I'd already met with a lawyer from the Women's Trust. She'd arrived under the guise of a neighbor delivering a welcome pie. Her car stayed parked 2 blocks away, engine still warm. We sat together in the kitchen, papers spread between us. The language was clear, the house, the account, the savings, everything now protected under my name and transferred to the trust. No sale could proceed without my written approval. No transfer could bypass it. When the lawyer left, she carried the signed documents in her tote, sealed and notarized. I walked her to the porch with a calm heart. So when I put my pen down that night and handed Juliet her folder, I didn't feel fear. Only completion. She gathered the papers carefully, thanked me again, and left the room. I heard Bennett whisper something about calling the realtor in the morning. I lay back against the pillow, folded my hands, and listened to their muffled voices fade down the hall. By sunrise, the final act had already begun. I was sitting at the kitchen table, stirring my tea, when Bennett came in like a storm. His face was red, his breath sharp, and his phone shook in his hand. "What did you do?" he shouted. I didn't answer right away. I simply looked up, then back down to my cup. He slammed the phone on the counter. The bank called. They flagged unusual activity. Said someone changed the beneficiary account without notifying us. I raised an eyebrow. Unusual. Juliet came in behind him, barefoot, mascara still smeared from sleep. She looked at me like I was something sour in her mouth. The realtor just called. He says the house isn't eligible for sale. It's listed under a trust. I took another sip of tea. You forged those papers just to get our signatures, didn't you? she accused. "I didn't forge anything I said. I just gave you what you asked for." Bennett leaned over the table. "You had no right." I met his eyes then. "You wanted control. You just didn't ask whose." Juliet cursed under her breath, pacing like a caged animal. Bennett stood frozen still, processing. I could see it unraveling in his head, the months of planning the locked doors, the manipulated paperwork. It had all been built on the assumption that I wouldn't notice, wouldn't act, but I had. And now the house, the savings, the accounts, they were mine again. Not in theory, not sentimentally. Legally. Bennett looked like a boy who had just dropped something valuable and couldn't figure out how to pick it up. Juliet walked out of the room without a word. He didn't follow her. Instead, he pulled out a chair across from me and sat down slowly. His voice was quieter now. Why I watched the steam rise between us. Because silence was the only thing you ever listened to. I didn't say it. I didn't need to. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway. Someone else was about to learn what couldn't be undone. They didn't come with sirens. Just two cars, silent and deliberate, rolling into the driveway, like visitors who already knew the way. I stood by the window watching the officers step out. No urgency, no confusion, just confirmation. Juliet saw them through the front door's glass and backed away, like the floor had shifted. She turned to Bennett. "What did you do?" He didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the paper in his hand, the letter I'd left by the fridge, the one with the list of account numbers and dates. His mouth opened, but no words came. When they knocked, I opened the door. "Odessa Lane." I nodded. "That's me. We'd like to speak to Juliet and Bennett Reed." I stepped aside. "They're just down the hall." Juliet tried to say something about it all being a mistake, a family dispute. One of the officers read from a clipboard evidence of forgery, misappropriation of retirement funds, falsification of legal documents. Her voice cracked before she even reached the second denial. They placed her in cuffs. She didn't resist. Bennett's protests were louder, more theatrical. "You don't understand. This is a misunderstanding. She's old. She doesn't remember things clearly." An officer turned to him calmly. "The bank does. And so does the security footage from last month." I didn't flinch when they walked him out. His voice faded before the squad car door shut. Back inside, the house felt wider, larger. Not because it was empty, but because I could finally breathe without permission. I sat at the kitchen table and ran my fingers along the rim of my mug. Everything was still. No locks, no trays. No shadows moving past the doorway. Only quiet. I walked down the hallway and touched the wall where they'd hung their wedding photo. The nail was still there. I didn't pull it out. Some holes need to be seen. That night, I took out my old journal and turned to the last empty page. The curtains moved again, not just because the wind pushed them, but because I finally let them. For weeks, the house had held its breath. Now it exhaled. I opened every window, every door. I walked through each room, not as a ghost, but as the woman who lived there. The room they once locked me in, where I ate off trays and listened to whispers through the walls, I turned it into something else. I found a second-hand armchair moved in a lamp stacked the side table with books. It became a reading nook, a place to sit and think, not shrink. The first woman who came to stay was named Teresa. Her son had pushed her out after her name disappeared from the lease. She sat quietly at my kitchen table the first night, unsure whether to speak or eat. I passed her a bowl of soup and said nothing. Sometimes silence is the most generous form of welcome. Others came in time. Not many, just enough. One had bruises she didn't explain. Another left all her belongings in a plastic bag behind a gas station. Each woman carried her own weight and left some of it behind, piece by piece, in the quiet corners of my home. I kept the fridge full. I left a spare key by the mailbox for those who needed to arrive late. Once a week, my lawyer came by and helped the women fill out paperwork, orders of protection, name restorations, social security appeals. I didn't tell them everything that had happened here. I didn't need to. When someone asked, I just said, "Sometimes a locked door leads to a wider field." They understood. And when I sat by the lemon tree in the backyard, I didn't look for ghosts anymore. I looked for blooms. The house, once a cage, was breathing again. Not because I had chased the pain out, but because I'd let something else in. By spring, someone had painted the mailbox. I never asked who.